at this point? Questions for Mr. Warner or for Mr. Calhoun?
Clint, your rationale is based on the definition for usable shoreline, which is saying that shoreline length on lots of record that is available for use in lake structures after subtracting the required 30 feet for both 15-foot yard setbacks. So because of the topography of this lot, that setback comes back in abnormally because of that 90-degree turn.
Yeah, it's just one of those, unfortunate, lot line layouts that, takes, a large chunk of shoreline out. It happens, I'm sure other lots, and we haven't run into a situation, like this, but I'm sure there are other lots where probably a similar situation has, where you have a section of a lot that, does have unusable shoreline based on the location of the setback line.
And I'm slow, so I apologize, Mr. Warner.
all
I'm a contractor by trade, so don't fault me for that. But when I'm looking at what you gave us as Exhibit A,
Yes, sir.
this red line that's drawn here is off this shoreline right here with the riprap, correct? So this red line, which you're defining, so where does the green line come in and the red line come in? That's,
The green line is the shoreline as we presented it.
okay.
The red line is the shoreline from the seawall with the boathouse moved a little bit, only to show that in our opinion, and I want to speak to that just for a second, in our opinion, this is the only difference, that space and this right here.
And you're within that, correct?
We're within the green line as presented.
But you're not within
Explain-
the
Show that down here, explain that down here for Mr. Ormsby and Mr. Hook.
We gotta figure out how to speak in the microphone for.
We got these.
If you catch these, you're good. Yeah.
I'm on the right page at 30
No, here, this is what we're on now. Exhibit A.
Clint has made the point, or believes truly, that we have installed the riprap to shorten the distance from the point where the 15-foot setback line hits the seawall. Now the 15-foot setback line hits the riprap, and we're measuring from there. He wants to measure it from here only. In my opinion, that is totally incorrect. The 30-foot line is measured perpendicular to the seawall always, and it's established before anything else. You can draw the 30-foot line from property line extension to property line extension. Then you put your setbacks in and you create the space. The 30-foot measurement is over at that point. There's no, and I'm not sure how or why he got that opinion, but all you have to do is be inside of 30 feet away from the shore. You don't have to have the longest point on your structure to be less than 30 feet.
This is 30 feet?
This is 60 feet or something like that.
He just showed us what he's measuring from.
That's what he's measuring from here, and he's saying that we're putting this riprap in here to shorten the space to back from here to here as the measurement, okay? That's not why we did that. All we did that was to gain 4 extra feet and protect the boat and have a little room for his boat here to operate, okay? So that's why the riprap is put in there. And to measure from this point way back here where that shoreline arrow is, all the way out to here and say it's not legal because it's way more than 30 feet is incorrect. It's always measured back to the 990 grade line, not out on this, and that's not perpendicular. In other words, the shortest point is all you have to satisfy. If you can hit shore within 30 feet, then you're good. He's saying that because this line here should be 30 feet here, and this boathouse should be way back here. We've already established that we can go all the way out to here, because this 30-foot limit is off of the shoreline. It's not off of the usable shoreline. Okay? By definition, the shoreline, the 30-foot is taken from the shoreline. Then your usable shoreline is between those 2 points, and it says 30 feet. You subtract off. I
Here to
mean,
here's 30 feet?
no, 30 feet would be, if this line, if this seawall went straight into here, then you'd have 15 feet here and 15 feet on the other side.
Off the joining property line.
Off the other setback line, which doesn't come into play here at all, okay? So all we're doing is we're staying off of that line, and we're saying we're within the 30-foot construction limit. We've added a limited amount of riprap here to build, and that's, I think the riprap, if it's not required by the town, I think it's required by the 401Q, is it not?
Only for new seawalls.
Okay. But we can elect to put that in
Yes.
if we want to. So my statement about requiring, I mean, all indications are it's recommended, you should do it. It protects against the bathtub effect in the lake by breaking the waves down. It theoretically provides habitat for the trout to live in. So there's all kinds of reasons they give you for putting that riprap in there. Well, the only benefit the property owner can get from it is he's got to pay for it, put it down there, and then you subtract off whatever that distance is, and you can't use that much space. So we've moved it out where the 990 hits, and that's all we're taking.
I'm sorry, Kim, one more. The existing seawall determines where the shoreline is,
Yes.
whether regular or irregular. So it's 30 feet from where?
All right, there's also this definition, measured from the contour elevation of 990.
So you're saying that our regulations contradict each other.
Oh, it wasn't gonna come to that, but I think there's some improvements that could be made that would be helpful. But it's complicated, but it's usable. You just have to sift through it to get all the way to the end. But there are some contradictions there, admittedly. Sorry, Michelle.
So you're proposing the one that is 30 foot from the riprap, not the one, because there's, in this exhibit A, you've got one that's been moved back and you've got one that's 30 foot.
That's the one that
You're
you-
proposing 30 foot from the
Yes.
riprap. Okay.
That is on the permit that was denied. So
Okay.
that's what we're appealing.
Okay, that makes sense.
And
When I s-
I've also shown you several places where the riprap was installed and permitted without question. And some of them not done by you, because you haven't been there forever.
Yeah.
I'm working on them forever. One bullet point that's in Clint's original permit denial letter. One inadvertent result of shoreline stabilization is that it can cause the shoreline projection to change by a few feet, which is acceptable in some cases where extreme stabilization may be needed or a property owner has a desire to further protect their seawall. Not only because the riprap has to be installed to specific specifications and changes the location of the 990 elevation line, providing the ability to lengthen a lake structure by a few additional feet. This is not a frequent occurrence, but it does happen. My few feet is 4.5.
Well,
I think I've said it.
yeah, we'll hash it out here just a little bit.
All right.
Thank you.
I guess I'm gonna ask this question. That might not be the right thing for me to ask, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. You know me. How many of you feel like you're qualified to make a proper, or fair decision on this?
Well, we're on the board.
We should,
I don't know if it matters.
one way or the other.
Explain that to me.
Well, unfortunately, it's the duty of this board to make the decision, qualified or not. So we're on the board. You know, just like if you have a building inspector that doesn't know how to inspect buildings, if he's still a building inspector, he can sign the permit. I just don't know if it's a valid, if it makes a big difference for me.
How about anybody else's opinion? Mr. Erickson?
I have to rely on Mr. Calhoun's expertise. He's been here 12 years reading these regulations, and I think he knows them thoroughly. I know we're not considering alternative methods, but it sounds to me like there are other approaches that can be done. Variance was mentioned by several people here on the encroachment of the 15-foot setback in order to get around that sticky issue of what is usable shoreline. And I think the designers need to talk with Clint and maybe come up with an alternative solution, which would involve a variance request. But right now, I would have to go along with Clint's interpretation of denial of the request.
Okay. Mr. Butts? I mean, we haven't even made a motion. I'm just polling everybody.
Right.
I'm just, you
Well, I'm
know,
telling you where I'm coming from.
I'm trying to be fair to, as we all are,
Right,
to everybody involved, so.
right.
Well, I don't think we should consider any of the other options.
Well, that's not what
That's
we're.
what-
No, we're not.
Even
Our,
though-
our one charge is to say, yes, Clint made, we agree that Clint made the right decision in disallowing it, or that we think Clint made the wrong decision in disallowing it. That's all we're doing.
Well, I'd have to say based upon the the rule or the regulation that David read earlier, it don't say it has to, it doesn't say where it has to be usable. I mean, that's plain in our book.
Okay, so you feel, you know, I don't have to tell me which way you would vote, but you feel comfortable with what you've heard, you can vote one way or the other,
I do.
okay? Mr. Hook?
I'm really not comfortable one way or the other, so football parlance, the ruling on the field is that it was disapproved, and I see no definitive evidence to say it should be reversed, so I'd go with a calling on the field.
Mr. Butts, do you have another opinion other than?
That we're on the
That
board.
we're on the
going-
board?
Well, I mean, I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to
It
cheat
does,
you,
but
but
it does make sense. I know we're on the board and we're here to, and I know there's other options. I just want, I want to,
Were you aware of, Clint, were you aware of other projects being permitted, the 30-foot setback off of the shoreline stabilization added riprap?
Yes.
Okay.
And, just to clarify that, what happens, when you, and if you look at every one of those instances, all of those boathouses are basically located perpendicular to the shoreline. It's a standard, boathouse design and layout along, it's perpendicular to the shoreline. What happens when you add riprap in order to help protect that seawall is it creates a situation where, you may or may not have to move that boathouse a little bit, depending on at what point you're doing the riprap. It's not something that I like. It's kind of like Kim said, it's a slight loophole that exists with the whole riprap thing and the interpretation of the 9-9. Depending on at what point in your project that you're putting riprap in, it may make it such that you can't put posts in and, hug that thing right up against the seawall. It's part of, the construction. So it's one of those things that, in some cases, as Mr. Warner pointed out, I've kind of taken that and given a little bit of leeway to accommodate where you have a particular, maybe say a slight bend in a seawall that's going to cause that to kind of push out a little bit more. I think that's, kind of a common sense approach, in accommodating, the use of riprap in order to protect the seawall. But I think that in this case, it's a different application because as I see the way that 35-foot line being applied and being measured from, to me, the riprap is a tool for, keeping off, to basically extend the shoreline out of the setback. That's the way I see it.
Would you, and just this, I'm assuming you covered this, the whole structure does fall below the 40% or 45% in there?
As far as their covered area.
Yeah.
Everything meets the requirements.
Okay.
As far, except for the way I see where they're, making their, lake projection measurement. Generally, that projection is made from a point, or actually it's 2 points on the shoreline. And in this case, we've only got 1 point that can be measured off of. So it doesn't matter if it's a regular shoreline or irregular shoreline, you've only got 1 point to measure off of. Because if you measure on the outside of it, it's even, even farther projection. So, that's part of the difficulty of this whole thing. It's not something that we've seen before, and, that the only thing that I have to compare it to is the way I've applied it in other situations, and it's the same application that I've used, in other cases.
any other questions? Mr. Butts,
No.
anyone else got any other questions? Probably unusual to do this, but I'm going to,
Entertain a motion.
no, I'm not going to entertain a motion. I'm going to have one more witness that I'm going to call myself. I think it's appropriate in this situation with former Chairman Weber's expertise and experience and time he spent on this to have an opinion. And so I'm going to ask him if he's willing to be sworn, and I know that he was involved in some of the language that's written on this thing back when it was changed, and I'd just like to have an opinion from him, if he's agreeable. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Okay, you, Mr. Ware, you've heard all the testimony and everything here today. I'm not asking you to, I'm asking you to just to give an opinion.
Well, I would prefer not to give an opinion, to be
Okay.
honest.
I would ask you
If I
to,
might give you simple facts
That's-
that are clearly stated and not an opinion, I think it would be better.
okay, that's really.
One of the things I heard was the discussion on qualification of the board. You're qualified to make the decision whether or not he made the right decision. And if you decide that he made the right decision and the applicant wants to go further with the appeal, then it goes to the council. Period, no problem. If you decide he made the wrong decision, then I would assume the application gets approved and they build their structure.
That was gonna be one of my questions for you.
The usable shoreline. First of all, most of anything that has adopted 41216 in your lake structure regulations, I was the primary author of it. So usable shoreline, the shoreline linked on lots of record, and this is a lot of record. It was platted long before these regulations were generated. And it has been recorded in the Register of Deeds Office of Rutherford County, so it is a lot of record. The shoreline linked on lots of record, that is, these are the key words, available for use for lake structures after subtracting the required 30 feet for both 15-foot side yard setbacks from the measurable shoreline. Testimony is you have 139.5 feet measurable shoreline. I don't think the testimony ever indicated, but on one of your exhibits, I think it's 92.5. Is it not, Tim, that you show on exhibit?
Yeah, I added that to that.
92.8.
Exhibit B, page 2, it shows down on the bottom, 92.8 is your usable shoreline. So that is the usable shoreline available for use for lake structures. So you have to determine, is this proposed project using that shoreline for the lake structures? Another issue that I heard was view. I would recommend you go back and read the definition for a lake structure, what its intended use is. Read the definition for a boathouse, what its intended use is. And none of those mention view. We have had one prior case, and one of the pages in the packet shows the thin, small wood boathouse, and shows which was done in 14. The boathouse beside that, I can't remember the name, done back in 2011, was the impetus for changing the shoreline definition where it put for the purpose of positioning lake structures along an irregular boundary. That changed because of the house next door to the Smallwood property. But according to Mr. Warner's testimony, you're saying that you don't have any irregular shoreline.
Correct.
So,
Because there is no definition for it, so we can call it a regular
okay.
or not a regular.
And I'm not arguing that.
Understood.
You have a measurable shoreline, you have a usable shoreline. The usable shoreline is available for use for lake structures. So what's the intent of that? The intent of that is that lake structures are positioned upon that usable shoreline. Not an opinion, that's a fact. My intent when I wrote it. So, if there are any other questions I could possibly answer, again, I'd rather provide you with a fact, what I can reference, and not an opinion. Why? Because as a commissioner,
I understand.
if this goes to an appeal to the council, then I would be sitting on that council.
Right. I didn't mean, when I
No, I
said
understand.
opinion, I meant fact.
I got it.
Questions for Mr. Weber? Okay,
I would,
What?
could I ask?
yes, sir.
How would you say that this structure as proposed is not within the usable shoreline?
You've identified on your drawing where the usable shoreline is, or you did in the packet. And you're showing the 92.8. Apparently, you have subtracted all of that down to here.
Yeah.
And then from here on to the other
Minus
setback
the-
line is the usable shoreline.
Correct.
This is not within the usable shoreline.
Why not?
Kim, what, come
It's
up,
not, it's not touching the shoreline. It is not outside of that 92 feet. It does not touch the shoreline, so it is not using that shoreline.
And the usable shoreline, is that shoreline available for use for lake structure?
Correct.
Here,
And
I mean-
there's no rule about angles to the usable shoreline, as long as we're within the 15-foot setback on either side and the 30-foot limit as measured from the shoreline, not the usable shoreline, then we comply. Our contention is we comply wholeheartedly.
And I'm not arguing that or disputing that. I'm not doing that, not in this form, simply because of where this could lead.
okay. All right.
Any,
Other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions of any of the witnesses by anybody?
No, I'm ready to make it.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Warner? Okay. All righty then. Oh. Come up to the,
Yeah, well,
come up to the thing.
I don't know that matters. He was discussing view. He said something about how we had mentioned view, and we haven't mentioned view. And there's these points, I don't know these regulations like you all, but obviously we are the homeowners. And there are a lot of issues associated with building this boathouse that nobody's discussed. But I want to make the point that this isn't, just so y'all understand, you can picture this. This is a single boathouse. This is not a big boathouse. We intentionally we're trying to build a boathouse that does not obstruct anybody else's view and that does not use up the cove that Dr. Stewart apparently thinks that we can't even build in the cove. We've tried very hard to position a boathouse within the rules, and as I was explained to me, I thought we were well within them, that is not obtrusive. I mean, I realize we're being very technical, and I understand that. I practiced law for 11 years, and I understand regulations, but there is a practical piece here, is that we were trying to build a boathouse that doesn't affect one neighbor's cove and doesn't affect the other neighbor's view. I know those things don't matter, and we're not trying to get, but there are some pragmatic effects here. We've tried to do all the right things, and I know that's not your decision here. I understand what you're reviewing. But I just want to make that point as the homeowner, is that we've really tried to do the right thing here. And we've tried to we didn't build a great big boathouse. We're not building a 6,000 square foot house. I've been at Lake Lure since 1986. We are trying to build something that everyone would like, that doesn't, and if we have to move it, it will either impact somebody's view or somebody's code. So I just want to make the point that we weren't trying to manipulate anything to get something unfair. And that's it. We've been here a long time, and I hope we get to stay here a little longer. Thanks. But this wasn't being changed for the view.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion
Okay.
to
No?
Not for this, y'all.
Either for or against.
Yeah, I guess it would. So, we would need a motion, it may be in the positive, right? So,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
say one other thing for you.
Yes, sir.
Realizing some things on Lake Structure Board are a little different from Board of Adjustment. Whereas if you were hearing an appeal on Board of Adjustment, it would take a 3 out of 5 vote to either grant or deny that appeal. You still are required a 4 out of 5 on Lake Structure Appeals Board. So I just wanted to make sure that that's understood. Supermajority is still required, and it was intentionally left that way since the lake is town property.
Okay.
all right, I think I can wing this. All right. With regards to case number LSAV 2016002, a petition for appeal of an administrative determining result in the disapproval of a lake structure permit. I'm just going to read this, but I move the board
To uphold.
Yeah, I move the board to uphold the staff decision. Guess.
I think so.
So if you vote in the positive, that means that you are voting that Clint made the right decision. If you vote in the negative, you're voting in favor of the appellant, or of
The
the
applicant.
applicant, saying that you feel Clint made the wrong decision.
Okay. Everyone understand?
Yes.
Okay. So you've heard the motion, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Erickson. Mr. Erickson, I'll let you start.
Well, as I stated before, I think that Mr. Calhoun made a correct interpretation of the regulations, and that I think with a little bit of manipulating the location of this and possibility of requesting a variance to encroach upon that setback area, the applicant could achieve what they're trying to in a very similar situation. But that has to be worked out between the applicant and the client, and Clint, I'm sorry. So therefore, I vote in the positive, agreeing with Clint's interpretation.
Okay, Mr. Butts?
I also vote in the positive. In the difficult decision, I do feel like the term 30 feet does define as shoreline, and I feel like measuring shoreline off of the riprap from an existing seawall puts it beyond that 30 feet. That's the only way I see this being an issue. If it were within, if it measured off the seawall and came back to the, just for what it's worth, I would have no problem feeling like Clint made the wrong decision if the proposed moved back drawing was proposed. So in essence, the addition of the riprap is where I have to vote in favor that Clint made the right decision. I do feel, though, that the applicant made a good point in that the term is shoreline, not usable shoreline. But it's how I define shoreline. And shoreline would go back to the fact that it is off of the seawall.
Okay. Mr. Hook?
Yeah, I agree with the environmental manager, officer assessment. Although I also agree with Mr. Warner that there are some aspects of the written guidelines that are confusing at best.
Okay. Mr. Osby?
Well, I vote in favor of the landowners, based upon the reading of the ordinance that David read. Nowhere in there did it say usable. It said shoreline. I also saw pictures of other boathouses, sort of similar, that had used the same thing. So I feel like Clint made the wrong interpretation based upon what I've seen in the reading, so I have to vote no.
Okay. Well, I think that it's been a learning experience for everyone, especially for me in this process. I think it's another situation of Lake Lure issues that are not able to be cut and dried and black and white. And I think it as Mr. Warner has stated, and you know, it's cloudy at best in some of these things, and I think that maybe there's some room for improvement there, that to keep this from being an issue again. I do think that my vote is going to be a yes, that I think Clint based his decision on what he felt was his understanding of what the rules and the guidelines are. I'm also going to state that, as was stated over here on this, by several of you, that I think there are options that can be submitted that either can be worked out directly with Clint, or that can be submitted in the form of variance, and understanding that it's not cut and dried, that coming to this board, we would consider all the issues and aspects and everything that's submitted, and making a good decision if there were variance submitted. So my answer is, my vote is to support Clint's decision. Therefore, the vote is 4-1 in favor of
The appeal is denied.
the, pardon?
So therefore the appeal is denied.
That's right, the appeal's denied, and your first option is to appeal it to town council, if you wish to do that. And if you wish to obviously come back to Clint and try to come up with something that will work for you. And it's not been an easy one for us, one of the toughest ones we've had in a long time. And we don't take them lightly, I can assure you. And so hopefully we can work everything out and make it where it's acceptable for the town and for the regulations, and where it's acceptable for the landowners. So the denial is not granted, and supported the decision made by the town staff. So this case is closed. So let me get back to my papers here. If I can find them. It's a long since I got my hands on business. Yeah, here I had something written down. Give me 1 second. Okay, any new business, any old business that we need to discuss?
No.
Okay, hearing nothing for old business, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Make a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, before we do that, let me remind everybody, next month's meeting is November, and that's moved to the 3rd Tuesday of the month because of Thanksgiving. Is that correct? So next month's meeting, I think, was November the 15th. We looked at the calendar, we approved that at the beginning of the year.
Right.
So everyone be sure you note that on your calendar, and if we have reason to have a meeting next month, it could be a special Thanksgiving. If we don't, we will meet on the 15th.
It doesn't look like there's going to be any cases. It doesn't look like there's going to be any cases, because this would be the cutoff week anyway, because of it being an early meeting.
Oh, would it? Okay, well, we may be a good Thanksgiving.
This place did something.
So we are, Adjourn.